All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. You ready to get our hands dirty?
Always. I love getting into the nitty-gritty, especially when it comes to international relations.
Right. And this one is a big one for anyone even thinking about the UPSC exam.
hmm
We're tackling environmental politics.
It's a topic that can feel huge. Like, where do you even start?
Yeah, exactly. So to help us out, we've got some excerpts from a text all about the rise of green politics.
This is like the go-to book for anyone serious about IR.
Right.
It's not just a dry textbook, though. It actually traces how we think about the environment, which I find really helpful.
Okay, so we're looking at the history of ideas and how those ideas become action. That sounds pretty cool. And we're starting in the 1960s and 70s. The book says that's when environmental politics really took off. What was happening back then?
Well, it was the peak of industrialization. We were mass producing everything, and people were starting to see the environmental costs, the pollution, the resource depletion. It was like a wake-up call.
Like we were so busy building the future that we forgot to check if the planet could keep up.
Exactly. And that's where the environmental movement comes in. It was a reaction to this kind of careless progress. People started questioning this idea that economic growth could just go on forever without consequences.
And that's where books like Silent Spring come in, right?
Absolutely. Rachel Carson's book was a game changer. Most people know it for exposing the dangers of pesticides, but it went deeper than that.
Deeper how?
Carson argued that everything is connected. The pesticides weren't just killing bugs, they were messing up entire ecosystems and impacting human health. It was about seeing the big picture, the delicate balance of nature.
Wow. And that message really resonated. Silent Spring was a huge bestseller. It really helped get the environmental movement going strong.
It did. And then you see groups like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth emerging. They were really on the front lines challenging governments and corporations demanding change.
So these organizations were about more than just raising awareness. They were taking action, holding the powerful accountable.
Right. And to understand their impact, it's helpful to look at the main problems they were tackling. The text breaks it down into three main pillars of environmentalism: resource problems, sink problems, and ethical problems.
Okay, break it down for us.
Sure. So resource problems are basically about acknowledging that our planet's resources are finite. We can't keep using them up at this rate.
We only have so much oil, so much clean water, you name it.
Exactly. It brings up big questions about conservation, sustainable development, shifting to renewable energy, all super relevant to the UPSC syllabus.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, what about those sink problems? What are those all about?
Think of it this way. We produce a lot of waste, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Sink problems are about managing that waste. It's pollution control recycling, developing cleaner technologies. Things like India's push for electric vehicles that's addressing sink problems head on by trying to reduce air pollution.
So it's not just about using less, but also about minimizing the harm we do in the process.
Got it. And then we have the ethical problems. This is where it gets a bit more philosophical.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's about recognizing that nature has value in itself, not just for what we can get out of it. This is where things like animal rights, wildlife conservation, and sustainable agriculture come in.
So if resource problems are about what we take, and sink problems are about what we leave behind, ethical problems are about how we see ourselves in relation to nature.
Exactly. And for UPSC preppers, this dimension is really important because it highlights how ethical considerations are shaping international environmental agreements.
That's helpful context. Now, the text also mentions this concept of global finiteness, which became a big deal in the 1970s. What does that mean exactly?
It's the realization that we live on a planet with limits. And this spaceship Earth metaphor sums it up perfectly. We're all on this ship together, sharing limited resources and facing the same environmental challenges.
I like that image. And it makes sense when you think about how the dominant economic model back then was all about limitless growth.
Right. Economist Kenneth Bolden called that the cowboy economy. It's this mindset where resources seem endless and the environment is just something to conquer. But things like the 1973 oil crisis showed us that even powerful nations are vulnerable to resource scarcity.
A big wake-up call.
It was. And then you have reports like Only One Earth and the limits to growth, arguing that unchecked economic growth would lead to disaster. So by the 1970s, there's this growing awareness that environmental problems aren't just local, they're global.
And that requires global cooperation.
Exactly. We're not cowboys anymore. We're crewmates, and we need to act like it. It really is like we had to shift from that me mentality to a we mentality when it comes to the environment.
Totally. And the 70s really kickstarted that global shift.
Yeah.
But like you said before, there were bumps along the way. What happened after that initial burst of environmental awareness?
Well, like with anything, progress isn't always a straight line. The 70s also saw a global recession, and the Cold War was still raging. So, understandably, environmental concerns took a bit of a backseat.
It's like the world had to focus on putting out other fires first.
Yeah, in a way. But then the 1980s brought some major environmental disasters that forced the issue back to the forefront.
You're talking about things like the Bhopal gas leak in Chernobyl, right?
Exactly. Those tragedies were devastating wake-up calls. They showed the world what could happen when environmental risks were ignored. It highlighted the need for stricter regulations and a real focus on safety, both within countries and internationally.
It's a stark reminder that environmental protection isn't just about saving trees. It's about protecting human lives, too.
Absolutely. And during this time, you also see a growing awareness of how environmental issues are connected to development, especially in developing countries.
That makes sense. As countries industrialize, they often put economic growth ahead of environmental protection,
Right. And that approach had consequences. Developing nations started pushing back, saying, hey, we shouldn't have to choose between development and a healthy environment.
which leads us to the Brundtland Commission report in 1987. That's where the idea of sustainable development really took hold, right?
You got it. That report was a game changer. It argued that we need to find ways to meet our needs without messing things up for future generations. Development and environment have to go hand in hand.
That idea is still so relevant today.
Absolutely. The Brundtland Report paved the way for the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. It was a huge gathering of world leaders to address a whole range of environmental issues.
Rio was a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? They talked about everything from climate change to protecting biodiversity, and it led to some major agreements too, like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
The UNFCCC, that's the foundation for all the international climate negotiations that are happening today. So yeah, Rio was a big step forward, building on what started in Stockholm.
So by the 90s, climate change is really front and center in the global conversation.
It is. We still had concerns about CFCs and ozone depletion, but the focus was shifting to greenhouse gases and their impact on the climate.
And of course, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, played a key role in providing the scientific evidence to back all of this up.
Totally. Their reports were crucial for informing policy decisions. They really helped the world understand the urgency of the climate crisis.
But even with all that evidence, getting countries to agree on action has been a huge challenge.
Oh, absolutely. The 1997 Kyoto Protocol aimed to cut emissions, but it faced a lot of pushback. Some countries didn't fully participate, and implementation was tricky.
And then there's Copenhagen in 2009. That was supposed to be the next big step after Kyoto, but it didn't quite live up to expectations.
It's tough, right? You have all these competing national interests. It's that tragedy of the commons idea we talked about before.
Where countries prioritize their own short-term gains over the long-term health of the planet.
Exactly. And that tension makes international cooperation really difficult. It's something UPSC aspirants definitely need to understand. It's not just about the science, it's about politics and economics and power dynamics.
So it's complicated, but we're starting to see some progress, aren't we? There's more awareness than ever before and a growing sense of urgency.
Definitely. The Paris Agreement in 2015 was a major milestone. It brought almost all countries together to commit to reducing emissions.
And there's been a lot of focus on renewable energy and sustainable development. Those ideas that came out of the Brundtland Report are finally starting to take root.
They are, but there's still a long way to go. The climate crisis is a huge challenge, and we need to keep pushing for bold action. That's the message I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating journey. We've covered so much ground. But where do we go from here?
The text ends with a question about the future of environmentalism and global cooperation. It's kind of open-ended.
It is open-ended, and I think that's on purpose.
Yeah.
It's like the authors are challenging us to really think about what's next, especially for those getting ready for the UPSC, because this isn't just theoretical. The choices we make today will shape the future of the planet. No pressure, right? It's a lot to take in. But I think you're right. We're at a turning point. And understanding how we got here, the history of environmental politics, all the successes and failures of past agreements, that gives us a roadmap for moving forward.
Exactly. It's like having a compass. It doesn't tell you exactly which path to take, but it helps you orient yourself. It helps you make informed decisions. And that's what we need right now, informed action.
So what do you think? What does the future hold for environmentalism and global cooperation? Any predictions?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a rich woman. But honestly, I think it's up to us. The future isn't predetermined. It's something we create through our choices and actions.
I like that. It's a call to action, not just a prediction.
Exactly. And that's the message I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive. Don't just sit back and watch. Get involved. Make your voice heard.
Be the change you want to see in the world, right? That's still cliche, but it's true.
It is. And knowledge is power. The more you understand about these issues, the better equipped you'll be to make a difference.
So to all our listeners out there, especially those prepping for the UPSC, don't just memorize facts. Think critically. Engage with the material, because this isn't just about passing an exam. It's about shaping the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the early days of green politics to the complexities of international agreements. But this is really just the beginning.
It is. There's so much more to explore, so many different perspectives and approaches. And we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment. Let us know what other topics you'd like us to tackle.
We love hearing from you. Your curiosity inspires us. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making a difference.
And don't forget to like and share this episode with your friends, classmates, anyone who's interested in understanding the world a little bit better. See you next time.